ago, I made a video called The Best Benders in Each Style, referring to the best benders of each element in Avatar: The Last Airbender, where I went through every single bender in each individual style and decided which is the best bender in each individual element. So Uncle Iroh is the world's greatest firebender, while Toph is the world's greatest earthbender, and so on and so forth. It's a very easy concept. And that video did very well. So well, in fact, it's one of the best performing videos on the Weeb Commander. And somehow in my all-knowing, all-seeing content brain, I never got the idea of, that worked really well in Avatar: The Last Airbender. What if we did it on our Naruto page? Until, this morning, because obviously I've had the thought. We're talking about it now. Which is why today I want to adapt that idea, but drag it on over to Naruto. Today, I don't want to talk about the greatest bender of each elemental style. Today, I want to talk about the greatest user of every different type of chakra release. However, the way that I made sure that the Avatar: The Last Airbender video wasn't only 5 minutes long because I only had to talk about 4 bending styles was that I also decided to talk about sub-bending classes like lava bending and metal bending. And while there are no sub-elemental releases unless you consider Kekkei Genkai, Kekkei and Kekkei Toda, most Kekkei are used by one person and one person alone, so being like, oh yeah, Haku is the greatest ice style user would be kind of stupid. I mean, some Kekkei Genkai like Boil Release and Lava Release are used by more than one person, but fortunately, I don't have to stoop to that level to make this video longer than 20 minutes, because in Naruto, not only is there 5 elements, but also Yin, Yang, and Yin-Yang release, leaving us with a grand total of 8 different elemental releases that you and me get to talk about today. But more than that, we're going to be talking about the strongest users of all 8 of these elemental releases. And believe it or not, there's no repeats on this list, though admittedly there probably could be. I tried to make it that way. And the strongest fire style user is Shibai. Water style, Shibai. Earth is, it's Shibai. So for the sake of this video, not being me just saying Kaguya or Hagoromo's name over and over and over again, there are no repeats. Got it? Good. So with no further ado, let's get into the strongest users of every elemental release in Naruto explained. But before we get to explaining anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you love the idea of me explaining some of your favorite things from anime, you're gonna love my other channel, The Weeb Commander, where instead of talking about Naruto and Boruto, I talk all other anime. And if you just love the idea of me talking anime, you're gonna love my anime podcast, Otaku's Anonymous, where me and Daddy Mata break down everything that happened in anime this week. It's available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. And if you want to look like a true weeb, guys, go ahead and head over to my brand new merch shop, otakusanonymous.net, where you can pick up some of the greatest anime t-shirts, sweatshirts, and sticker packs known to man. Elemental releases, the true spice of life that makes Naruto's power system so complicated yet cool. Well, actually, calling Naruto's power system complicated is a stretch. It's really pretty simple. And a lot of that is because the majority of the powers within the confines of Naruto can be drawn back to these 8 elemental releases. Did you just use fire? That's fire release. Did you use lightning? That's lightning release. Did you use genjutsu? That's yin release. Did you just make yourself really big? That's yang release. Did you just change reality to make it so the body that you are currently inhabiting no longer exists and craft yourself a new body based off your imaginations in a somewhat close proximity? That's yin-yang release. Pretty much the only things that don't fall within the capacity of the 8 releases are things like shuriken jutsu or kenjutsu or taijutsu, physical hand-to-hand fighting. But anything that uses molded chakra whatsoever falls under the umbrella of the 8 releases. There's no rules saying that the riskier a jutsu is to use, the stronger it gets. There's no barrier battles with different parameters that can make the inside of your barrier stronger than the outside of your barrier and vice versa. There's no pachinko fit into the power system. Naruto's power system is simple, yet well fleshed out, with pretty much the most complicated thing in Naruto's power system universe being things like dojutsu and whatever abilities the Otsutsuki happen to bring along with them. Shinjutsu, which is most likely a yin-yang jutsu, is starting to really scratch away at the simple sticker though. Naruto is pretty rapidly encroaching on complicated power system. But today we're focusing on the simple stuff, and what's more simple than fire release? There's really no specific place that you can start a video like this, so I'm just gonna start with one of my favorite elemental releases, which happens to be one of the weaker ones, as pretty much every time we've ever seen fire release used in Naruto, it's done a grand total of nothing at all. One exception to that rule. Well, the fireball jutsu kind of seems like the ki blast in Dragon Ball Z. The second that you start rapid firing ki blasts, you know that the fight's probably washed for the person rapid firing. There is one Uchiha who flies in the face of the idea that fire release isn't as strong as it should be, and that person is none other than Madara. See, Madara is one of the few people who's able to use all 5 nature releases and Yin and Yang techniques, meaning that Madara can use basically any kind of elemental release known to man. And as a wielder of Yin-Yang release, he's also able to combine elemental releases to make Kekkei Genkai. So there's pretty much nothing that Madara can't do. However, Madara wouldn't be able to retain his moniker as the strongest Uchiha ever if he wasn't the strongest at what made the Uchiha great. And I'm not talking about the Sharingan, though he is obviously also very talented with his Sharingan. See, if the Uchiha are known for 2 things, it's the Sharingan and the Fireball technique. But in a broader sense, they're known for the Sharingan and their fire release. In fact, in the Uchiha clan, it's stated that you can't be considered a full-fledged Uchiha until you master the Fireball technique. And the promise of an Uchiha clan's member is kind of dictated by how large and plentiful the fireballs that they can create are, which is why when Itachi and Shisui were able to use Anbu level fire release at young ages, everybody knew that they'd be legit threats one day. But Madara's fire release is on a different level. See, while we always knew that Madara was strong, we truly didn't get a good idea of how strong Madara was until he was released in the 4th Great Shinobi World War. And prior to Madara getting any upgrades whatsoever, just Edo Tensei Madara running around being as strong as he was when he died against Hashirama, that is, the first time. Madara showed us some of the most impressive elemental release we've ever seen. In fact, the fire release that Madara uses in the first part of the 4th Great Shinobi World War is referred to as the pinnacle of Uchiha fire release. And one of the fire releases that he uses is called Great Fire Annihilation. And by using this technique, Madara is able to make a wall of flames that should have barbecued an entire battalion of the Shinobi Alliance, 20,000 people. However, this Great Fire Annihilation was nullified, fortunately, when the entirety of the water users within the 4th Battalion stepped up and used water release against it. Now, for those of you who don't know, every elemental release has a set weakness, and fire's weakness is very obviously water. This means that Madara is able to create a level of fire release that an entire battalion of people wielding an elementally advantageous matchup need to muster all of their strength just to nullify. But Madara's flame release doesn't always get nullified, as when Madara used his other strongest flame release ability, Great Flame Flower, he basically launched a barrage of flame asteroids at the entirety of the 4th Battalion that the majority of them were not able to nullify. Because even if people tried to create earth release barriers or nullify these fireballs with water release, it didn't work. And with this move alone, Madara killed thousands of shinobi.
Oh, Nick, what about Amaterasu and Kagutsuchi?
It's almost cheating to me. It's an MS ability. It's barely fire. But also, please, show me one time that Kagutsuchi and or Amaterasu is able to do the level of damage that Madara is able to do with his base fire release. The only reason Amaterasu or Kagutsuchi ever do as much damage as they do is because Sasuke throws them on a more powerful attack. Like when he coats one of his Susanoo arrows with it, or combines it with Naruto's wind release Rasen Shuriken. Madara was using fire and just fire. And thus, when it comes to the strongest fire style user in all of Naruto, I gotta give it to him. But enough about fire, let's talk about fire's weakness, water. Because the title of strongest water user in all of Naruto is a slightly contentious one, though I don't think it should be. See, really, when it comes down to it, there's 3 people you can talk about when talking about the strongest water style users in all of Naruto's history. The third is Gengetsu Hozuki, the second Mizukage. Gengetsu Hozuki is strong enough that he was able to kill the likes of Mu, a wielder of particle style, and also battle against an entire battalion in the 4th Great Shinobi World War while telling them how to defeat him. Of the 3 we're going to talk about here, his power as a water style user is absolutely the most underrated, and I believe he very much deserves to be in the conversation. The second person that people would talk about would be Tobirama Senju, who many would have as the strongest wielder of water style ever. And this is because pretty much every time that we ever see Tobirama battle, this is the primary element that he battles with. And since Tobirama was a Hokage, and more importantly, the second Hokage, people will believe that since Tobirama was so powerful and his main elemental release was water, that it's pretty logical that he would be the strongest ever water user. And this claim is backed up by a couple of on-screen feats. Most specifically, the fact that Tobirama is able to use things like Water Dragon Bullet with one hand sign, when it takes people like Zabuza and Kakashi 44. Now, for those of you who don't know, the less hand signs that you need to do to pull off a jutsu, the more practice you are in that jutsu and also in chakra control. But I would argue that a fair amount of Tobirama's power actually came from his genius, as Tobirama didn't use water release to kill Izuna, did he? He used Flying Raijin and Shadow Clone and Edo Tensei. And therefore, even though Tobirama is probably the strongest water style user, that is to say the strongest person who uses water style pretty exclusively, I think if you measured up his water style against other people's water style, it would wouldn't be as strong. Like, I could sit here and say that Naruto is the strongest every single style user, because Naruto has used every single elemental release. He has access to them all. But does that mean that every single one of the elemental releases that he uses is stronger than everybody else's elemental release just because he himself is stronger? Within the confines of this video, no, it doesn't. I mean, probably. I mean, technically, when Naruto used his lava release Rasen Shuriken, he was kind of using fire release, and that was probably stronger than anything Madara could create. But that's boring, and it's my video. So in my heart of hearts, I genuinely believe that there is one person out there with stronger water-style jutsu than Tobirama, and that one person is Kisame. Kisame is referred to as the tailless tailed beast, because when it comes to entities that currently exist on Earth, the only things with more chakra than Kisame are tailed beasts. And this is why Kisame is selected as the wielder of Samehada, because Samehada loves his chakra signature, and therefore, admittedly, a large amount of Kisame's strength comes from wielding Samehada, but also a large portion of his strength comes from his water release. See, every single person coming from the Hidden Mist Village has to be at least somewhat talented in water release. I mean, they live on an island surrounded by mist. They don't really have an option, which is why people like Gengetsu Hozuki, Mei, Zabuza, and Kisame are all very talented water release users. But out of all of them, I genuinely believe that Kisame is the most talented. And that probably has to do largely with his chakra reserves. See, because while the finesse of Kisame's water release is somewhat lacking, the sheer volume of it is overwhelming. See, Kisame uses an ability known as Exploding Water Colliding Wave, which is a somewhat straightforward water jutsu. All Kisame has to do is spit out a massive amount of water from his mouth, and he creates a tidal wave. Now, the size of the tidal wave is completely proportional to the amount of water spit out, which is completely proportional to the amount of chakra used. And considering the fact that Kisame's chakra pools are endless, the amount of water he can create, and therefore the size of the tidal wave he can create, is terrifying. In fact, it's stated that Kisame is able to turn a dry wasteland into a small ocean in an instant. So Kisame is able to make a tsunami, and not just the regular tsunami, but a tsunami that he can also ride. And considering the fact that Kisame is half shark and is way more comfortable in water than on land, this not only gives him the geographical advantage, but also is gonna sweep you off your feet, and oh yeah, he's coming at you at the speed of a tsunami, which is a couple hundred miles an hour. Is about 60 feet tall. Kisame has also shown a massive amount of proficiency in the water prison technique. He changes the vast majority of his water release into the shape of sharks, which is really bad for you if the battle at one point ends up in water, which it probably will, considering the fact he can make small oceans, because simply by placing his hand on any surface of water, he's able to create 5 feeding sharks. That's an actual water jutsu he has, 5 feeding sharks. And these 5 feeding sharks are all under Kisame's control. But even if the small ocean and tidal wave he creates isn't enough to make sure that you end up in the water, he also has his water prison shark dance technique, which comes after the exploding water colliding wave technique, but uses the water generated from that technique to create a massive dome or a prison of water that he not only can't breathe in, but he can breathe in, because gills. And now you have to battle against Kisame underwater in a constantly readjusting and movable water prison that you can't break out of. Oh, and did I mention not only can he create sharks out of water, he can also summon them. But he doesn't really have to rely on summoned sharks, because the sharks that he can create from water release are so powerful they were able to overwhelm Might Guy's Morning Peacock, which is when Might Guy opens to the 6th gate and punches air so hard it lights on fire. All in all, do I think in a battle between Tobirama and Kisame that Tobirama probably comes out victorious? Yeah, I mean, it's close. But overall, I think Kisame is the better water style user. And for that, he's getting our water style crown. About water, let's talk about what water is weak to for some reason. Earth release. I mean, I guess it kind of makes sense. Water would have a hard time punching through earth. This title is fortunately way less contentious than water or even fire. Anybody who's the greatest earth style user is gonna come from the village hidden in the stone. Unfortunately, the village hidden in the stone has only had a couple of relevant fighters throughout its entire history. And by far and away, the most relevant fighter from the Hidden Stone's history is the guy who was around for the entirety of the Hidden Stone's history, Inoki. I don't think anybody can argue with this. Inoki is the 3rd Tsuchikage, the grandson to the 1st Tsuchikage, a human being who's existed for as long as the Hidden Stone has existed. You know, that's until Boruto decided to kill him off in non-canon. Inoki was 79 years old in Naruto Shippuden when he was introduced. And because of that, the Inoki that we see in the 4th Great Shinobi World War is far beyond his prime. And yet, in the 4th Great Shinobi World War, Madara identifies Inoki as one of the only possible threats to him in the war. And this is because Inoki is a master of particle release, also known as dust release, which is a combination of earth, wind, and fire. But I don't want to talk about dust release because dust release isn't technically earth release, because even without dust release, Inoki is an incredibly formidable fighter, and that comes on the back of his earth release. With the power of his dust release, he was able to destroy entire islands at his peak. But when it comes down to earth release, we've seen Inoki be able to equip himself with massive earth gauntlets that would increase the mass and destruction that he was able to dole out with his fists. He's also able to create rock clones and massive earth golems that can do the fighting for him. But he's also able to use earth release a lot like an earthbender would in Avatar: The Last Airbender, as he has access to at a very high level a technique known as moving earth core, which gives the user complete and total control over the earth around them, being able to either raise the ground above them or lower it to evade attacks or to trap enemies. But Inoki also uses earth release in a way that we only ever see Tsuchikage use earth release, and technically a way that we only see the first 3 Tsuchikage use earth release. See, Inoki, Mu, and Inoki's grandfather, the first Tsuchikage, all have the ability to play with gravity. By either using super lightweight boulder jutsu or super heavyweight boulder jutsu, Inoki is able to either increase or decrease the amount of gravity that something is affected by, which is how Inoki, at over 80 years old, was able to be one of the primary factors in the fact that the first meteor didn't hit the Shinobi Alliance. But Inoki has gone further than this. Inoki lifted Genbu, the island turtle, a moving fortress equivalent in size to Konoha's Forest of Death. But Inoki doesn't only have to make things lighter, he can also make things heavier. Because of this, if Inoki gets his hands on you, he can make gravity 10 times more effective on you, slowing you down massively. But he's also able to use his technique on himself, which is why him and the other 2 Tsuchikage prior to him are able to fly, as he's able to make gravity have next to no effect on him. On top of this, Inoki can change gravitational pulls on different parts of his body, which is why, much like Blast in One Punch Man, Inoki is able to increase the gravity on his punches, which is why he'll often cover his hands with stone and then increase the gravity of the punch to make sure they dole out a fair amount of damage, which is good because he's a 3-foot 80-year-old. So it seems fairly obvious that Inoki is our strongest ever earth release user. Unless, of course, you wanted to toss like Toneri's hat into the ring, possibly. But I'm gonna try to keep as many Otsutsukis off this list as possible. Toneri created an earth golem that was able to battle against a construct of Kurama. And like in actuality, that feat and that feat alone does make Toneri a stronger earth style release user than Inoki. But once again, boring. Not as boring as this is about to be for me, because coming up next we have lightning. And unfortunately, the answer is pretty clear here. Genuinely, I would be tripping if I said that the strongest lightning user in all of Naruto was anybody else but Sasuke. But you could make an argument for Madara, and also his mouth laser is technically Gale style, and that's like his strongest lightning move. Also, you know, like his purple Palpatine lasers that come out of his fingertips. Also, fun fact, not lightning release, yin release. Isn't that wild? It's silly because the technique is literally called yin release lightning dispatch, but it's a combination of his yin release and his natural energy. So yeah, when it comes down to it, Sasuke is very easily the greatest lightning user in the history of Naruto, and he's kind of always been. See, Sasuke picked up the Chidori from Kakashi at a very young age, as he needed a weapon that would be able to battle against the absolute defense of Gaara, and he achieved that. In the Chunin exams, he was able to punch through Gaara's sand shell and cut Gaara with his Chidori.
But Nick, that's Kakashi's jutsu. How can we give Sasuke credit for using Kakashi's jutsu?
Fair. And well, I'm not going to sit here and say that Sasuke did more with the Chidori than Kakashi, because objectively he didn't, and that's not because Sasuke didn't do a lot with Chidori. He did, it's just Kakashi also did a lot with his Raikiri. Kakashi's Raikiri and Sasuke Chidori adapted in very different ways. See, while Kakashi did things like his Raikiri tracking Fang, which allowed him to convert his Raikiri into a lightning tiger that jumped at his opponents at high speeds, therefore making sure that he would actually be able to keep range from his opponents and still use his Raikiri, Sasuke adapted in a somewhat separate way. Sasuke applied shape transformation to his Chidori in more of a straightforward kind of way, either using his Chidori to electrify already existing weapons to increase their cutting power, like with the sword of Kusanagi, turning his Chidori into hundreds, if not thousands of Senbon that are able to electrocute and take out anybody that they come into contact with, applying Chidori to his Susanoo and making it larger and deadlier than ever, or extending the range of Chidori to shoot out like a spear to either impale Orochimaru or Danzo or Kari. On top of this, upon extending the range of Chidori, he's able to use his Chidori like a hand sword. Well, he's definitely not alone in the adapting of Chidori, aka Raikiri. Sasuke definitely did it in a way that was unique to him. Outside of this, Sasuke is the only person in the history of Naruto we've ever seen wield literal lightning, not chakra-generated lightning, actual lightning. As Sasuke's ability Kirin that allows him to draw lightning out of thunderclouds is not only one of the fastest techniques in all of Naruto, but also one of the most destructive, as it was almost able to kill Itachi, and also travels at the speed of lightning. These lightning releases pale in comparison to Sasuke's strongest lightning release move, Indra's Arrow, which, albeit he was only ever able to use once and will never be able to use again. However, with the power of Indra's Arrow, by channeling the power of 8.5-tailed beasts, Sasuke was able to make a lightning bolt that he fired with the bow from his Susanoo that was so powerful it was able to nullify Naruto's Ultra Big Ball 6-pass Rasen Shuriken and a tailed beast ball Rasen Shuriken with an elemental type advantage, as the wind release in Rasen Shuriken actually gives Naruto an advantage against the lightning release in Indra's Arrow. And with the usage of Indra's Arrow, if it hadn't hurtled into two of Naruto's strongest attacks, Sasuke very easily could have wiped out entire large islands. When it comes down to it, mostly because all of Madara's lightning techniques aren't actually lightning, Sasuke is undeniably the strongest lightning user in Naruto. But even if Madara's lightning techniques were actually lightning, he would still probably be the strongest lightning technique user. But I ain't never seen him cut a Truth Seeker orb with his mouth. And for that, we gotta give Madara at least a couple of points. But speaking of Truth Seeker orbs, let's talk about the person who was wielding said Truth Seeker orbs, because coming up last of the 5 elemental releases, we have Wind Release. And who do we think is the strongest Wind Release user in the entirety of Naruto? That's right, ladies and gentlemen, Temari. With the power of her 3-moon fan and her Weasel Sickle summon, Temari is undoubtedly I'm kidding, it's Naruto. Naruto's natural elemental release is Wind Release, which is why Sasuke's natural elemental release is Lightning Release. It's the Pokemon system. The main character's rival is always gonna have the element that's weaker to yours, or to the main character, you get it. Now, for a long time, that is the entirety of OG Naruto and a good chunk of Shippuden, Naruto didn't use Wind Release. In fact, it wasn't until Naruto realized, would love to throw this Rasengan that he began to use his Wind Release. And that took a while, up until he was able to use it against Kakuzu, and even that was an incomplete form of the Rasen Shuriken. See, that was a Wind Release Rasengan, not even a Rasen Shuriken. But I know a lot of people will probably say that Naruto accomplishing the Rasen Shuriken isn't all that impressive, except for the fact that, yeah, it is. Well, obviously, there are other people out there like Temari who explicitly use Wind Release, and with the power of that Wind Release are able to do things like destroying entire forests. Naruto, when he created the Wind Release Rasengan that later became the Rasen Shuriken, became the first ever person to add an elemental release to a Rasengan, even after Kakashi and Minato, two of the most talented ninjas of all time, tried exactly that. Now, maybe the problem is that neither of them ever tried to add Wind Release, because I believe Minato tried Fire Release and one other, and Kakashi obviously tried Lightning Release, which collapsed the Rasengan down into Ichidori. But Naruto pulling off the Rasen Shuriken was no small feat, as in order to add Wind Release onto his Rasengan, he had to add a second Shadow Clone to add Wind Release Chakra to the Rasengan that another Shadow Clone was forming while he produced the chakra. Now, obviously, as time progresses, Naruto doesn't need any of this, but it should speak to the level of difficulty to adding any kind of elemental release to a Rasengan. On top of that, a Rasen Shuriken is referred to as the pinnacle of shape transformation, something that nobody prior to Naruto was able to accomplish. And with the power of this Rasen Shuriken, Naruto has done basically everything. He's cut down entire armies of Ten Tails clones, he's cut the God Tree in half. Naruto was so afraid of the Rasen Shuriken barreling into his face that he had to activate his Rinnegan and absorb it. And sure, of course, you could tie a lot of these feats into the other things that were tied into the Rasen Shuriken. Naruto wiping out an entire army of Ten Tails clones is tied into the fact that Sasuke's Kagutsuchi was added to it to technically make it Scorch Release. Naruto being able to cut the God Tree in half is obviously tied into the fact that it was a Lava Release Rasen Shuriken, but at the base of all of this is Wind Release. And without Wind Release, Naruto wouldn't be able to throw a Rasen Shuriken, which mind you is so sharp that it cuts you on a cellular level. And once a Rasen Shuriken explodes, it creates millions of little microscopic wind blades. So many that a fully evolved Sharingan can't count and react to all of them. And these wind blades cut into your body and disconnect your cells from your chakra circulatory system, meaning a Rasen Shuriken in its purest form actually operates a lot like Gentle Fist. However, your ability to not use chakra isn't temporary, it's permanent. The damage done by being hit by a Rasen Shuriken is so bad that medical ninjutsu can't heal it. And Tsunade is so afraid of its creation that she likens it to poison, saying if people receive too much damage from a Rasen Shuriken, they'll never be able to use jutsu again. There's a reason that Naruto uses a barrage of Rasen Shuriken against Kaguya. They're very powerful. Elemental releases, those are boring. Let's get to our more conceptual releases. And there's no release more conceptual than Yin release. Now, unfortunately, with the Yin release category here, we are gonna have a repeat. And it's, just kidding, it's Madara. See, Yin release, for those of you who don't know, is kind of about controlling things that don't exist. It's a technique that uses spiritual energy to create form out of your imagination. And because of this, pretty much the best example of Yin release in Naruto is Genjutsu. As in order to put somebody under Genjutsu, you have to make nothingness appear real. You have to create a scene and a scenario to cast that person's brain into. Another example of this is the Naruto Shadow Possession Jutsu. So in actuality, I could have very easily given this best ever Yin release user to somebody like Shikamaru, our now 8th Hokage. The Shadow Jutsus of the Naruto clan are definitely not the strongest Yin releases. The strongest Yin releases are very obviously Genjutsu. So really when it comes down to it, if you're asking the question, who's the strongest Yin release user of all time, you have to ask the other question, who's the strongest Genjutsu user of all time? And while some people would answer this question with Shisui, as he was able to use Kodo Matsukame in both eyes, Shisui is not the greatest Genjutsu user of all time. Sure, Kodo Matsukame is very impressive, but you can use it on, what, 24 people in your entire lifetime, maybe? Another fantastic answer would be Itachi. I mean, Itachi uses Tsukiyomi on a bunch of people. He's able to give his girlfriend 80 years of a life with him, and when she dies of old age in that Tsukiyomi dream, she dies in real life, meaning that Itachi can kill people with Tsukiyomi. But even that isn't the strongest usage of Genjutsu we've ever seen. See, because the strongest usage of Genjutsu we've ever seen is Tsukiyomi, but just not regular Tsukiyomi. It's infinite Tsukiyomi. And only 2 people in the history of Naruto's world have pulled off infinite Tsukiyomi, and those were the only 2 possessors of Rinne Sharingan in the history of Naruto's world, Kaguya and 3 Rinnegan Madara. Now, I would very happily concede that Kaguya is probably the strongest Yin release user of all time. But once again, I'm trying to keep Otsutsuki's off the list here. So when you're trying to keep Otsutsuki's off the list, the only other person that even gives Kaguya a run for her money in terms of being the strongest Genjutsu user of all time is Madara, because he, just like her, managed to put the entire world under Genjutsu, which kind of blows feats like Itachi using Tsukiyomi on people like Kakashi out of the water, because Kakashi would have been affected by infinite Tsukiyomi if he wasn't protected by Sasuke Susanoo, and many people who are stronger than Kakashi were affected by infinite Tsukiyomi. So when it comes down to the greatest Genjutsu feats we've seen out of anybody in Naruto, outside of the Kurama clan, which technically isn't canon, but you really can't argue with infinite Tsukiyomi being the greatest Genjutsu ever cast. Now, sure, tie as much of that ability into the fact that he had a Rinne Sharingan and the 10 tails inside of him, but how does that take away from his Genjutsu prowess? I mean, he was able to reflect his Rinne Sharingan off the moon and do something that only Kaguya, a full-blooded Otsutsuki, was able to do. Not to mention, we talked about something earlier when we were talking about lightning release, and that was that Madara's Sage Art Yin release lightning dispatch ability isn't lightning release, it's Yin release. And this technique allows Madara to fire out lightning from his fingertips that moves at the speed of light. And with the power of this ability, he was able to fight on equal footing with post-Hagoromo power-up Naruto and Sasuke simultaneously. So even if you don't want to give him infinite Tsukiyomi, his lightning dispatch ability is stronger than anything Shikamaru could have pulled off and is at least as strong as the likes of Tsukiyomi and Kodo Matsukame in a practical combat sense. But when you add those 2 things together, yeah, he's the greatest Yin release user of all time. But what about Yang release? There's gotta be a bunch of different people who use Yang release, right? Wrong. The only people who use Yang release, and I mean just straight up Yang release, are the Akamichi, and kind of people who have mastered Snake Sage mode from Ryuchi Cave. I'll explain. Yang release uses physical energy to control vitality, which grants you the ability to either give life to forms that have none or increase your physical size. But these both do kind of fall under the umbrella of matter manipulation, by either being able to breathe life into an inanimate object or being able to increase the size of your hands or legs or entire body. You are giving extra life to something. Now, technically, the only abilities that are confirmed Yang release only abilities are the Akamichi's partial expansion jutsu and calorie control abilities, which means basically anything that the Akamichi do to augment their size in any capacity whatsoever is Yang release. However, within the confines of how Yang release is explained, technically, the ability that people who have trained in Ryuchi Cave and gotten the bite of the Great White Snake Sage have to breathe life into inanimate objects should also technically be considered Yang release. As we know, people who train in Ryuchi Cave have the ability to pump their chakra into things like the ground and create golems out of the ground that are now technically alive. Now, this is painted in the color of Senjutsu, it could also just as easily fall into the categorization of Yang release. But since it isn't canonically confirmed to be Yang release, we're gonna stick with the Akamichi here. So our greatest ever Yang release user is Choji. It was that Chozo or Chocho, so here we are. Choji, like all other Akamichi in the clan, has the calorie control ability that allows him to convert physical calories in his body to chakra. And because of this, the Akamichi clan has to keep some weight on them, because technically, the heavier that an Akamichi clan member is, the more chakra they have access to. And through this technique, Choji has access to the multi-size technique, also known as partial transformation or human bullet tank or full body transformation. Basically, Choji has the ability to make any part of him bigger, and that either manifests through Choji making his fists massive to make his punches more powerful, or puffing up his body into a giant ball and pulling his head, arms, and legs in and spinning at people at high speeds, or doing that and then having Shikamaru wield him like a yo-yo. But at the highest level of the multi-size technique, Choji is also able to make his entire body massive. And I mean massive. It's stated in the data book that Choji is able to make his body the size of a mountain at the speed of lightning. And this is corroborated by the fact that when he's at his largest, he's as big as the Geto statue, which is the husk of the Ten Tails, one of the biggest entities in the Naruto world. Now, big as a mountain is kind of ambiguous. Countries agree that in order for a hill to be considered a mountain, it has to be 1,000 feet taller than its surrounding area. While in the UK and the Republic of Ireland, to be considered a mountain, the summit has to be higher than 2,000 feet. So the definition surrounding around what is a mountain and what isn't a mountain is kind of contentious. But for the sake of today's video, I'm not trying to pixel scale how tall Choji is, let's say he's at least 400 feet tall. That's a lot of feet. Not to mention that Choji is also able to access the incredibly powerful Akamichi technique, Butterfly Mode, which not only grants Choji at almost 400 feet tall the ability to fly, but also increases his speed and his chakra output. Is the reason that those butterfly wings are being made in the first place is because the Akamichi clan member who's able to access this mode is outputting so much chakra in their calorie conversion that some is leaking out from between their shoulder blades. And that immense amount of chakra that leaks out of their shoulder blades takes form butterfly wings. Now, obviously in OG Naruto, Choji was only ever able to access this mode after taking the tricolored pills. But by the time that Shippuden comes around, he's able to access it with no extra help. So yes, do I believe that Choji is currently the strongest Akamichi of all time? Probably. And since the Akamichi are the only people canonically confirmed to use Yang release and just Yang release, it's gonna be Choji. Which brings us to our last category, Yin-Yang release. The Yin-Yang release is the strongest out of all of the releases in Naruto, bar none. The Yin-Yang release combines, obviously, Yin and Yang release, meaning that the user is able to take their imagination and give it real physical form. This is why Izanagi is a Yin-Yang release, because Izanagi is technically just accessing creation of all things for a little bit, which is why you're able to imagine that the body that just got impaled by a big purple arrow isn't in fact impaled by a big purple arrow, and you're actually over there. And then you can just make your body over there. Now, the list of people who have access to Yin-Yang release is small. In fact, it's just basically every Otsutsuki we've ever met, Madara, Obito, and Naruto. And the only reason that Madara and Obito got access to the Yin-Yang release is because they were both at one point Ten Tails Jinchuriki. So of this very short, very prestigious list, who's the greatest ever user of Yin-Yang release? Well, unfortunately, there's really no avoiding the Otsutsuki when talking about Yin-Yang release because they're the ones who created it. I mean, they're kind of the ones who created everything, but still. And therefore, the strongest ever user of Yin-Yang release, pretty undeniably, is Hagoromo. Almost every single Yin-Yang release can tie its roots back to Hagoromo. Creation of all things is a technique that only Hagoromo has permanent access to, which is a technique that just allows Hagoromo to be like, I want my imagination to be reality. Do I have enough chakra to do that? I do. Now it is. And that's how Hagoromo was able to break 10 tails down into 9-tailed beasts. The Sword of Nabucco, which is an application of the True Secret Orbs, was also created by Hagoromo, and is said to be a weapon that could either create the Earth or destroy it. So a planetary sword is probably gonna win you a couple of points. In fact, pretty much any ability that revolves around True Secret Orbs is gonna be a Yin-Yang release, as True Secret Orbs are a Keke Mora, which isn't a combination of 2 elemental releases or 3, it's a combination of all 7. That is, all 5 elemental releases and Yin and Yang. And while Hagoromo wasn't the person who created True Secret Orbs, as we know that Kaguya also has access to them, he used them at the same level, if not a higher level, than Kaguya. And therefore the whole True Secret Orbs thing doesn't really give a point to Kaguya or Hagoromo. However, you know it does give a point to Hagoromo, the fact that 6-Pass Chibaku Tensei is a Yin-Yang release. What? I figured it would be an Earth release technique. No. See, because 6-Pass Chibaku Tensei requires that the Yin seal, or the moon, makes contact with somebody at the same time that the Yang seal, the sun, makes contact with somebody, combining the powers of both Yin and Yang to make that person a super-weighted gravity web that pulls all of the surrounding debris, roughly the size of a moon, around them and seals them, hopefully hopefully forever. It also seals the ready Sharingan, if they have one, of the person being sealed, and forcibly extracts all of their chakra. And therefore, considering the fact that Hagoromo is the only confirmed user of Creation of All Things, the Sword of Nabucco, and Chibaku Tensei all simultaneously, as obviously Obito used the Sword of Nabucco and Naruto used Chibaku Tensei, obviously Hagoromo is going to be the greatest ever user of Yin-Yang jutsus. And with that, we're done. That's all the releases. Do you guys agree with my list, or would yours have looked slightly different? Tell me in the comments below, and while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. If this video does less views than my Avatar The Last Airbender video, I'm just gonna talk about Avatar The Last Airbender forever.